Today, we are going to make some grass. No, I'm not in Colorado, so it's not going to be that kind of grass. It's our techniques that are so simple and sensible, your mothers have practically built themselves. Hello folks, it's Mad Dog Merv, and happy Veterans Day to you. I'm here in this very sacred and solemn place, and it makes me reflect on, well, those who gave their lives so that I have the freedom I have today, particularly the freedom to do this wonderful channel. So as you celebrate Veterans Day, however it is you celebrate Veterans Day, today I would like to look at some of the veterans in my life that have had a very profound impact. So without further ado, let's take a look at well, some of Mad Dog's favorite veterans.
Of course, we'll start out with my dad, Mel Brewer, who served in the Pacific in World War II. He was stationed in the Philippines in 1945 with the 25th Infantry Division, and later on, after the war was over, served with the occupation forces there in Japan. Dad was with the anti-tank battalion with the headquarters company there in the Philippines. So now we'll move on to my cousin Larry Sharp. And Larry, he's with the modern Navy, at least he was. He's now retired, but he was a captain with the U.S. Navy. But he has a very interesting story to tell about his father. So here's the story he told me in his own words. He says, "My father, your uncle, served in World War II on a heavy cruiser, the USS Pensacola CA-24. As a petty officer first class, or an E6 aviation radioman is what his job was. And it was to ride around in the rear seat of an OS-2U Kingfisher observation plane. These planes were catapulted off the side of the cruiser and radioed information back to the ship. He and the pilot both had .30 caliber machine guns. During my visit," he says, "my dad would sometimes very briefly mention shooting down a Japanese Zero during the war, but like many World War II veterans, didn't want to talk much about it. What he would never talk about is that during the Iwo Jima invasion, flying in the plane as gun spotter for the Pensacola, they met up with a Japanese Zero. I assume it kind of became a dogfight, and unbelievably the pilot was able to elude the Zero, get behind it and shoot it down. If you've ever seen an OS-2U, actually there's one at the at a Naval Airspace Museum at Udvar Hazy, you will realize what a feat this was. Kind of like a Piper Cub trying to take on an FA-18 Hornet. He hadn't been able to verify, but he believes this is the only incident of the OS-2U successfully shooting down a Japanese Zero. And his dad was in the plane that did it. He says, "After my dad died, I did some research and was able to put the verifying information together from the history of the Pensacola and his flight log. And it is absolutely true." He says he attached the annotation to the information, so he gave me the source. But kind of eerie to think about it. But if that one episode had gone differently and the Zero had shot down the OS-2U, well, my cousin wouldn't be there. But here's a picture of the pilot of that Kingfisher getting his medal. And somewhere in that picture, we haven't been able to find it, is Larry's dad. Well, that's kind of a neat story we didn't know until last year. Another one that we didn't know until recently was, well, my other cousin, Jim Gerbig, his father. Here's a picture of him. Served in Europe during World War II. He was with the 36th Infantry Division, and check this out, Bronze Star Medal. Staff Sergeant, Company M, 141st Infantry Regiment for heroic achievement in combat on November 3rd, 1944, in the vicinity of L'Épinargues, France. When his section of machine guns was attacked by a German force, Sergeant Gerbig exposed himself to the enemy fire to deploy his weapon, and he succeeded in silencing all but one enemy machine gun. He bravely crawled towards the hostile position and threw hand grenades which put the gun out of action and forced the crew to withdraw. By his alert and courageous actions, he inflicted many casualties on the hostile troops and repelled the attack. Pretty flippin' cool. So both my Uncle Larry and Uncle Jim were married to the same woman, and that was my Aunt Lucille. Her younger sister, my Aunt Pauline, well, she married an officer as well, Lael Abbott, who was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. He is now retired. And his son, my cousin Scott, also became a light colonel in the Army. So yeah, a lot of uncles that served. Now, my older sister, her husband, David Slawinski, is a lieutenant colonel. He actually served in Desert Storm, and this was him giving a speech at Memorial Day last year back east. As you can imagine, I'm very proud of my brother-in-law, Light Colonel Ski, as we call him, and the achievements that he had. So, moving on to some of my friends. This is my good buddy Mark Miller, my bestest pal. We hang out a lot together. We do a lot of modeling together, and Mark and I were actually going to go into the military together right out of high school. We wanted to work on that brand new M1 Abrams tank that had just come out. But my mother didn't want me to go into the military. And you know what? I was, back in the day, you honored what your mom and dad said. I didn't necessarily agree, but hey, I didn't go. So Mark went instead. And Mark actually became a truck driver. He didn't get in the motor pool, but he did become a truck driver. And he went to Desert Storm, where he served valiantly. And he was in a support company that helped support the artillery in their maneuvers. So thanks, Mark, for your service. Now on to some of my other friends. Carl Timmerman, here on the left, was with the 9th Special Forces, and he actually served from the early 1970s up until, well, he was a reservist when he passed away just a couple of years ago. But Carl made the rank of Brigadier General, believe it or not. Very good friend of mine, and got me involved in the Western Military History Association. And then another friend of mine, John Mulhall, and this is him in active duty not too long ago. He recently retired. He was actually working with me when I worked at Douglas Models. Speaking of modeling guys, my friend Pat Gilmore, this is a very old picture of Pat, who was an airline pilot as I knew him, but before that he actually flew several different jets, including some of the big cargo planes like the C-141. He knew that thing very, very intimately. The world's most interesting modeler, my friend Rob Humphreys. He was actually an air policeman. He was going to be a fighter pilot, but right as Vietnam stopped, they didn't need pilots, so we went on to become an air policeman. Speaking of air policemen, my friend Alan Kinney, God rest his soul, but he was an air policeman and carried an M60 in Vietnam, actually. Friend Josh Franklin, who I play World of Tanks with, served very recently in the U.S. Army. He was actually a tank driver for a while. And my friend Loic Antheon, who served in the French. And Jack Douglas, the son of Jack Sr., who was the founder of Douglas Models, a very good friend of mine. I worked for Jack here. That's how I got my start in the hobby business. And, well, Jack was a pilot, U.S. Air Force, so that was kind of a fun thing to hear his stories. And there's this wonderful group of people, the Western Military History Association. Blair Hope, Dave Chapman, Thad Forrester, Ed Clint, John Hallett, Bruce Morgan. They are such wonderful friends, but great veterans. They share the stories, and they are trying to keep the history alive. And I really appreciate all that they do. I am very blessed to be surrounded with all the veterans I have in my life. Have a great Veterans Day, folks. Thanks for joining us.